In this video, I'm going to demonstrate 3 marketing uses for the offset function. In the first one, I'm going to demonstrate how to use the offset function to build out a dynamic named range. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to build the offset function actually in Excel before we go into the name manager. The reason for that is that once you're in the name manager, if you build out a formula, you don't get any of the formula tooltips that you do if you build it out in Excel. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the offset function. And the way it works is the first thing Excel wants is a reference point. So for our medium column, we're going to use this cell here for our reference. Now, one thing that's important when you're building out dynamic named ranges is everything has to be locked down. So you're going to press F4 or Command T on the Mac to lock this reference down. And then this next argument just says, how many rows do you want to go down before we start counting or collecting the data for the cells? We actually want to start in that cell, so we're just going to put another comma in to move on to the next argument. Now what the calls argument is asking is how many columns do you want to move over before we start grabbing our named range? And we want to stay in this column, so we're just going to put another comma. Now the height, this is what we want. The height is how many cells do you want to be included? I'm actually going to scoop this out and move over here. And for the height, what we want to do is we want to give Excel a range of cells, and we want to say just count every cell that has a value in it. Now because these aren't numbers, because these are text, we can use another function called count A. If these were numbers, like these columns here, we could use count, but count won't include values. But the count function skips over anything that's not a number. So we're going to use count A. And then just grab enough cells that you think you'll need for expansion. And since they're free, you might as well be generous. I'll just come down to here. And we'll lock that down. Remember, everything has to be locked down. Now, as far as, let's go to our next one. Now if we put a comma, now Excel is just asking, what do you want the width to be? Well, our width is just one column, so we're just going to leave that blank. And in fact, we can even delete that comma because this is optional. Anytime you see an argument in brackets like this, it means it's optional. So we don't have to put a comma in, we can just close it off. Now, if I just enter this now, I'm going to get a value error. But if you want to test your offset function before bringing it into the name manager, then you can actually test it with another count A. This is just going to say, okay, how many cells in this range have values? So if we wrap this in this count A, if we've done it right, it will return 5 because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. If I add another one, it updates. So that's exactly what we want. So now what we can do is just scoop out the offset function. I'm just going to hit copy and then escape. Now we can go into our name manager and select new. And one thing I do is, especially if I'm building out a dashboard, I make my names really intuitive. So this data set represents marketing channels, so I would prepend it with something like MC. The reason for this is if you're building out a dashboard and you might have multiple named ranges in your dashboard, then this will group named ranges from the same data set together. If I have a particularly large data set, then I might even prepend each one with a number. So this might be MC01 and then medium, MC02, then visits. I don't have to do that in this case. It's not a very large data set. So I'm just going to say MC medium. And then we're going to replace this here with our offset formula. And then we'll click OK. Oops, got an extra parenthesis in there. Now to test it, we can just click this and the marching ants should be around our named range. Now if I want to test it, I can go back in, put in test or whatever you want, go back into the name manager, click this again, and you see the marching ants update. So the formula is working exactly as it should. So now what I do is I don't want to have to build that out each time. So this is just the shortcut that I use. I'll take the offset function, I'll bring it into Word, I'll paste it in. And then what I'll do is I'll just bring up the find and replace, and I'll say replace every instance of $B with $C. And you'll see how this works. You don't even have to close out of this. When I'm going back and forth, I don't even close out. I just select it, copy it, bring it back into here, and now what I'm going to do is say, okay, let's call this MC Visits, and I'll replace that with our new offset, and then we can test that. Now what I'm going to do is just pause the video and build out the others. Okay, so now you can see that I have bounce rate build out. I already built out medium and visits, and let's test revenue, and everything is working copacetically. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this chart here, which has been built on this data range here. If I right click and choose select data, you'll see everything is in here. But what we're going to do now is we're going to replace each of these with our named ranges. So first, let's go into our category axis labels. So we're going to update this reference here, which is currently hard-coded as B4 to B8. And we're going to grab just this part after the exclamation mark, delete that, and then press F3 to pull up your names to paste them. And we're going to replace this with MC Medium. And we're going to do the same thing for each of these. So for visits, we're going to select this, edit. The series name here just references this. So that's fine. We can just leave that as visits. We just want these values here to update. So again, we're going to grab after the exclamation mark, F3, and we're going to replace that with visits. Same with revenue. Again, this is fine. Keep that at D3. Grab this, F3, MC revenue, and bounce rate. But let's say we add PPC the following month, and we'll make this 800, 900, 30%. You can see here that our chart updates. But if the following month we don't run PPC, that's deleted, then our chart updates once again. And this is why building out dynamic named ranges is a better option than working with formatted tables. As much as I love formatted tables, with formatted tables, if your number of rows will only increase and will never decrease, then you can use a formatted table. We'll just use this custom one I've built. And if we add new rows, then it automatically increases. We'll say 30. So you can see everything automatically increases. The problem is if you take it away, then it doesn't automatically decrease. So if the following month you only had 5 mediums and the next month you might have 7 because you're running a special display campaign, then you're going to end up with these blank spots in your chart, which isn't ideal. And what you would actually have to do each month is go in here and manually update the table, or you could do it with a macro. But that's the advantage of the named range. Okay, moving on to dynamic data validation. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to build out a dynamic data validation list. So the way data validation works is you can create these really cool little drop-downs based on a list. And it's great when you want to restrict users' input, say in a table, to only certain options to keep your data clean. But every time you add something new to this list, you would have to go in and manually update your data validation. By using the offset function, you can create a dynamic list that continually updates, and I'll show you how that works. So first, what I'm going to show you is how to use data validation. So what we do here, we'll select this cell here, and you can go to Data, Data Validation, and under Settings, say Allow a List. And this is just going to allow us to select a list. Now if we select in here, and then choose this list, then we have this nice little drop-down with all of these options. But if I add something new, this doesn't update. So what we're going to do is use the offset function very similarly to the way we used it before, just select this, to make it update dynamically. So once again, let's build this out in a cell. So much like before, we're just going to choose a reference point. For this, we don't have to lock it down. Data validation isn't as picky, but we can for giggles. Now, just like before, we don't need to move over any rows or any columns, so we're just going to keep those blank. But we do need to dynamically choose the height. So just like we did before, we're going to use the CountA function and just give ourselves some extra room. Now, just like before, if I just hit enter or return on the Mac right now, I'm going to get a value error. But if I wrap this in a CountA function, then it's going to give me 5. And if I add a new one, it's going to give me 6. So that's a good indicator that our offset function is working the way we want it to. So now what we're going to do is, we'll just get rid of this. Get rid of this extra parenthesis here. And scoop this out. And now we're going to choose Data, Data Validation, go to List, except for the source, we're going to drop in our offset. I did that again. And choose OK. Now we have the data validation list just as we did before, but if we add something new, like let's say long form content as a content strategy, then when we choose our list here, it updates. So pretty cool. I'll just select the first one so it's a little more obvious that there's a data validation drop down there. Okay, this last use is a little trickier, but if you hang in there, it'll make sense. So one thing Google Analytics allows you to do is pull up data for a particular date range and compare it to a previous date range. So this is really good for getting month-over-month data or year-over-year. But it kind of pulls it into this format that's a little difficult to chart out. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the offset function to rework the format so that it's a little easier to chart out. And the first one, what we're going to do for each is we're just going to choose the cell. For the next one, what we need to do is, if you look at this data set over here, let's just think about logically what we want to do here. We'll use this as a reference point. So just keep that in mind that we're going to use this cell and this cell and this cell. Each of these cells as reference points to get the data that we want. Because remember, in offset, you start with a reference point. But then next up, we're going to need referral, and we just need one of those, one none, which is direct, one email, and one social. So you can see here, we're moving down 2 rows, then 4, then 6, then 8. So we need to figure out a way to dynamically increment the rows by 2. And one function that we're going to use in here is the row function. So with the row function, what you can do is you can say, what is the row of, let's just say, K1? Well, that's in row 1. And if we drag that down, 4 rows, then that's just saying that the row K2 is in the second row of our document. K3 that we see up in here, K3 is in the third row. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to multiply each of these by 2. So if you think about it, if we multiply each of these by 2, this will move me down 2, then 4, then 6, then 8. So let me show you how that will all play out. So for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to say equals offset. Our reference point is going to be this cell here. And we want to lock that down. Then for the rows, this is how many rows we want to move down to grab our data. This is what we want to use for this particular offset. Remember, for the dynamic named range and dynamic data validation, we didn't use the rows and columns because we were starting right at that row. In this case, we're only returning the value in a single cell, so we're going to use rows, we're not going to use columns, but we won't need height and width because it's just going to be a height of 1 and a width of 1, so we can just disregard those. But we want to know how many rows do we want to move down. So we're going to use that rows function, the row function, not the rows. And we'll just reference, let's say, the one above it, so B1, because that's going to give us the number 1. We're going to multiply it by 2, and then that's going to give us 2, so that's going to hop us down 2 rows. And then we don't have to worry about the number of columns because we're only working 1 column. So we're just going to put a comma there because this is technically a required argument, but if you put the comma in, it'll accept it. And you can see that we get referral, and if we drag this down, we're going to get none, and then we're going to get email. And all we did here is we just contrived a way to hop down 2 rows at a time. So we're going to do the same thing for last month. Now last month starts in the cell here, so we're just going to select that. We don't have to lock that down because we're not dragging that down. Oops, I didn't drag this down enough. There we go. So as we did before, if you notice, we just need to hop down 2 rows at a time because this was last month, this was last month, this was last month, etc., etc. So again, we're going to use the offset function. For our reference, we're going to start here. We're going to lock that down. And for the number of rows, we're just going to say row. Now we could always just use A1. We don't have to use D1 or B1. We just need something in this first row. But we'll just keep it D1. And then, just like before, we're going to multiply it by 2, comma, and that will give us 3005. When we drag it down, we're going to get 2021, 1645, 1386. Perfect. For the last year, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab this one here for our first one. And now we're going to use that as our reference point, just like we did with the others. So we're going to say offset, use this as our reference point, lock that down. We're going to say row of D1, just typing it in there, times 2. And then put this in here. And that's going to give us 2947, which is exactly what we want. And then just double click to drag that down. and these are all the values that we need. Now, once you have this, now you can easily build out a chart. For example, we could go with the clustered column. Of course, we would need to format this. I have plenty of videos on how to format charts. But one thing I don't like is that last month is in front of last year. I like things chronologically. So we're going to select data, and you can actually move these around. So, or I could grab this one and click the down facing arrow, and then that will give me last year and then last month. And you can see in the past year I've been doing a lot more blogging, and it has resulted in a significant increase in organic traffic. So, and then what I would do is I would get rid of these grid lines, and I never have the legend off to the right. I think that's a hideous option. Pop that to the top, and I'm also pretty partial to moving it around. You could even grab it and drag it into your chart. I've seen that done before, just to clean up some of the white space. If you're building out a dashboard, I don't recommend that. I'm actually partial to putting it on the right side. And then I'll have the chart title over on the left. So, like I said, those are a few examples that I came up with for how you can use the offset function with marketing data. Please share any others that you use.